Some of the elements of the DRS like airstrikes, employment of standoff weapons, drones and medium-range missiles like the BrahMos came into play in the May 25 escalation, but fizzled out rather quickly when Operation Sindoor was contested strongly by the Pakistan Air Force, attaining air superiority in a matter of hours, followed by punishing retaliatory strikes by the Pakistani military in Operation Banyan and Marsoos, including the destruction of an S-400 battery. A conclusion that can be drawn, therefore, is that large sizes of a military does not per se bestow strength. There are other factors, like I said, of quality, technology, training and other force multipliers that come into play and determine as to who comes up trumps. It is the final outcome of a war, limited or broader, that decides who the stronger protagonist might be. To me, frankly, at this point in time, having sent the Indian military reeling in two fair contests, it is Pakistan which seems to be the likely stronger protagonist. The India-Pakistan standoff in May 25 was an event which has generated profound and, if I may say, game-changing strategic effects on the future of war and peace, not only in South Asia, but also in an extended region in which I would like to include China and some other countries of Western Asia as well. There are serious political and strategic fallouts internationally, as well, in addition to the substantial perceptive change in the military equation. I would like to express with emphasis that Pakistan's nuclear policy of full spectrum deterrence is based on a robust operationalized nuclear capability, which in itself draws strength from a fully functional triad and an effective command and control system. I have explained its various dimensions at numerous national and international forums. It should also be well understood that whenever a situation of a serious military escalation or a crisis occurs in South Asia, like February 19 or May 25, Pakistan's robust nuclear capability simultaneously generates politico-strategic effects in two directions. In the east, in India, where it becomes a limiting factor on the scale, scope and character of military options that India might consider as possible. In the west, halfway around the globe in Washington DC mainly, but also in some key western capitals on the way, where alarm bells start to ring, compelling willy-nilly diplomatic interventions to manage and cool down the emerging crisis with or without a limited fight. Strategic deterrence and placing a limiting operational cap on crisis escalation are therefore inbuilt in Pakistan's capability of full spectrum deterrence. Unlike India, restraint and responsibility are key considerations in the exercise of Pakistan's nuclear policy. This has been demonstrated time and again. No one in the world is interested in a nuclear Armageddon, except Mr. Modi's India perhaps. In this context, I shall briefly quote a few examples from India-induced past escalations. First, 1986-87, when India's full operational military mobilization with ammunition on Pakistan borders under the garb of exercise brass tacks was called off when India was confronted by Pakistan's conventional forces counter-deployments and subtle nuclear messaging. This was the first in South Asia. 1999, in the Kargil crisis, Mr. Vajpayee's conscious decision to limit India's military responses to within the Kargil area of operations on the Kashmir line of control was a testament to the deterrence effect generated by Pakistan's newly demonstrated nuclear capability in May 98. Next, 2001 and 2, India's Operation Parakram with full military mobilization on Pakistan's borders was called off after 10 futile months when confronted by Pakistan's conventional forces counter-deployments, and this time strong nuclear signaling on at least 3 occasions, including 3 ballistic missile tests of Abdali, Shaheen 1 and Gauri by the SPD inside 4 days in May 2002. Then we come to 2019, post-Pulwama, Modi's risky politico-electoral gamble to hit Balakot in mainland Pakistan with Indian Air Force standoff missiles, which turned out to be non-hits anyway, violating Pakistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. India then backed off when the Pakistan Air Force unleashed Operation Swift retort, imposing costs on the Indian Air Force and on military targets on the line of control. Pakistan's nuclear capability prevented further escalation rungs, and then too President Trump 1.0 took pleasure in announcing an end to hostilities while visiting the two Koreas. And now in May 25, failing to achieve politico-military objectives and suffering humiliating reverses in the air and on the ground, Mr. Modi accepted a rescue ceasefire hastily brokered by the US. The nuclear factor weighed heavily on the mind of President Trump, which he continues to mention till today. Post May 25, I have followed with some interest misguided, uninformed and perhaps shallow opinions of sorts amongst Indian analysts on India's attack against a nuclear Pakistan. A conclusion is drawn that Pakistan's nuclear capability did not deter India from attacking mainland Pakistan, and therefore not only that Pakistan's nuclear bluff was called, but that India also succeeded in carving out the much sought after space for conventional war despite the nuclear overhang. In my opinion, both are anything but half-truths, perhaps quarter. This argument was loosely invoked in February 29 as well by partisan Indian analysts and senior officials. And I think this is more of an amateurish game of point scoring and chest thumping rather than a serious professional conclusion. On 7th May 25, notwithstanding Mr. Modi's bombastic rhetoric about not accepting what he labelled as Pakistan nuclear blackmail, the ground reality was, and this is now public knowledge, that Mr. Modi explicitly ordered his military to limit the operations to the alleged civilian terrorist targets only and not to touch military targets in Pakistan. Foreign Minister Jaishankar openly admitted as much and is on record. The Indian Defence Attaché in Indonesia, Captain Navy Shiv Kumar, complained as much and is on record. If this self-imposed politico-military caution by India was not deterrence against escalation in an environment of nuclear overhang, what else was it? The Indian decision was also based on India's earlier experience of attacking Balakot and the resultant PAF's Operation Swift retort in February 19, that against a heavily armed nuclear Pakistan, escalation rungs can only be climbed a few low notches and no more. Also, there was a caution and an awareness in India that I have mentioned earlier of an early international diplomatic intervention in order to limit a limited war to nothing more than a skirmish. Therefore, the obvious reasons for the explicitly limiting order by Mr. Modi, howsoever strategically and militarily naive, was motivated only by the pursuit of seeking domestic political advantage as in February 19, and not at all driven by any hi-fi considerations of the logic and theories of deterrence and escalation control. In a sense, Pakistan's nuclear and conventional deterrence remained at work, and therefore the only Indian military option after Pahalgam was to limit the scale and scope of the attack under the laughable expectation of a Pakistani connivance with Jaishankar's publicly admitted request to Pakistan not to retaliate. This was strategic effect generated by Pakistan's full spectrum deterrence in the East.